You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Well, hello, America. We are about 90 seconds away from showtime. This is Rick Robinson, host of America Off the Rails. We actually have a guest that'll be coming on with us this evening. But first, we do have to get another commercial out of the way. Just didn't want you guys to think I had forgotten about you. I promise we are about 60 seconds away from showtime. Hang tight, because this is going to be a great episode. This actually will tie back to some Twitter conversations some of you have seen over the last probably about 2 weeks. We're going to be discussing the difference between anarchy and voluntarism with a very special guest that I'll bring on after the opening monologue. We will be back here in just about 60 seconds. Please do not go away.
Keep on doing what you do, Rick. You're my favorite host. Favorite host.
This freedom is anything but free. What we have here depends on those who will fight for what they believe. When we stand together, there's nothing that we can't achieve. This nation of people standing as one in the name of liberty.
Well, hello, America. This is Rick Robinson, host of America Off the Rails. We're coming to you live right now from KLRNradio.com, and we are live every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. Eastern. Want to give a quick shout-out to the affiliates, whether you're listening to us on AMFM247.com every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern, the Lanterns Radio Network every Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Eastern, or the Talk America Radio Network, where we're live where we are aired every morning 6 a.m. Eastern, or crndigitaltalk.com, where we're on every Saturday and Sunday at 10 p.m. Eastern, 9 Central, 7 Pacific. Wherever you're listening to us, whether it be live, Memorex, or one of the simulcasts, I do just want to take a moment to say thank you very much for listening. Now, we could be spending the night talking about the Russia and the collusion and the media meltdown and all that fun stuff, but we actually have a guest. So we'll be bringing him on with us in just a couple minutes. But, I got to say something first. Look, I don't know what's going on with the Russia situation, which is one of the reasons why we're not talking about it tonight, because I'm tired of being this guy that keeps jumping into the middle of the fray without knowing what's going on, and then the left-leaning media saying one thing and the right-leaning media saying another. So I'm holding my tongue for right now. What I am going to do is sit here with the popcorn, and I'm going to enjoy the meltdown on both sides, because now, no matter what I say, I'm an enemy of the state, because I'm either for Donald Trump or I'm against him, and no matter how that works out, everybody hates me. I literally, for the first time ever, have lost just as many followers in a day as I have gained. I literally had 17 follow me and 17 unfollow me. I'm trying to figure out if that was Trumpers leaving or Trumpers coming aboard, because I basically just said, look, I'm not going to talk about this right now. I want to know what's going on just as much as everybody else does, but I'm not going to be the media and just jump all over it and try to make ratings off of it, because I'm sick of this. The media has been beating this horse for over a year. I don't know what's gone on. I want the truth just as much as everybody else, but I'm not going to be the guy sitting here fanning the flames. So we may talk about it some tomorrow night, but again, as I mentioned, we do have a guest coming on with us, and as soon as we get the first break out of the way, I will be bringing him on. We're going to be discussing basically anarchism, because there was a Twitter discussion that we had about a week or so ago, and apparently I was mistaken in quite a few things, or may not have been. I'll let you guys be the judge of that, but we're going to bring him on to have him educate me, because according to him and some people that were in the discussion chain with me, apparently I don't really understand what anarchy is, and that could be true. I'm not even going to lie. It's not really ever been a big thing for me. I am a small government guy, but I'm not a no government guy. So we'll talk about that in just about we got about 90 seconds, so we got to go ahead and work on getting this first break out of the way, and then when we come back, we will have our guest on with us, and I will introduce him here in just one moment. So bear with me for just a second, and I promise we'll be back here in just a little over 60 seconds. Stay tuned. folks. Whoa, hang on just a second. All right, folks, we are back. We are live. Sorry there for a second. I couldn't hear myself, so I didn't realize I was transmitting. All right, so we are live. We're on KLRNradio.com, and right now I have a guest. I'm only actually going to give out his first name because I didn't ask him if it was okay to give out both. So we have Jeremiah. We've been having a little bit of a back and forth on Twitter for a couple of days, and basically it was brought to my attention that I may not understand what he and folks that have the same ideology as he does actually believe anarchy is. So we're going to bring him on today, and we're going to spend probably the whole show, in between breaks, of course, talking about the differences between anarchy, voluntarism. Are they the same thing? Are people just not understanding different word choices? Whatever the case may be. All right, Jeremiah, you should be able to hear me now. So how are you, sir?
I'm reasonable, and I'm Jeremiah Harding. I'm Insanity is Free around the internet. I do a show called Moment of Rage, and I'm an anarchist. So I'm doing all right this evening. How about you?
I'm doing perfectly fine. I was glad to see that you accepted the invitation to come on here and actually try to give folks maybe a different perspective. Because I really think if we could just get past the anger and the drama, I don't really think there is that much of a difference between what you would consider an anarchist and what most of us would consider either a minarchist or a conservative. I think you may be a little more on the extreme of, basically almost no government, but I want to give you a chance to tell people your side of things. So why don't you explain for those that may not know anything other than the Merriam-Webster definition of anarchy, the definition 1 that comes up that talks about lawlessness and all that stuff. Why don't you give folks a different perspective? So what does being an anarchist mean to you?
Well, okay, so one of the first things that I started to do when I got into politics was I got into etymology and logic structures. And one of the first things that I did when I started to really look into anarchy specifically was to look at the root of the word, because I had this strong feeling that a ton of the animosity toward anarchy and a ton of the sort of malignment that came with the word came from the smears from government approved sources on anything that isn't government approved. And so it's interesting when you look it up. The etymology of the word anarchy is anarchos, which anarchos refers to an archon, and archons are rulers. And when I started to really look into that, and I heard from a bunch of anarchists that anarchy isn't no rules, but no rulers, it sort of made sense to me. A ruler being defined in this context as somebody with central authority to dictate policy, regardless of the interests or wishes of private property, or, if you're a certain type of anarchist, personal property owners. We don't support that sort of structure, essentially. And the real truth here is that the only difference between an anarchist and a minarchist is approach to certain problems, where anarchists generally believe that people can and will rationally organize, whether for the best or for the worst, for their interests if there is no government. The minarchists believe that there needs to be a small amount of centralized, coercive organization with essentially a monopoly on that use of force. And as anarchists, we don't support that. We don't support rulers, and we don't support a central group of people saying we can do these things and you can't, because if that wasn't the case, there would be chaos. We think that that's fundamentally untrue.
Okay, so for those that are tuning in maybe for the first time and hadn't really thought about anarchy in the way that you're framing it, you'd mentioned that anarchy, if you break down the etymology of the word, is more about rules without rulers. So and again, I'm coming from a completely naive perspective, so please understand at this point I'm just trying to flesh things out for those that may be listening. How exactly does one portend to have rules without rulers? How would that work?
Well, a ruler, in the context by which we refer to rulers, and by we I mean the majority of anarchists that I've spoken to, are centralized, coercive monopolies on that sort of rule. It's not as though they made a rule that's reasonable with their own property. It's as though they made a rule that whether or not property owners believe is reasonable or not, that they can enforce that rule anyway.
Okay, so I guess it still leaves me the same question, because I understand what it is that you're saying, but if there are rules, wouldn't there be people that have to enforce those rules, and wouldn't those technically by definition be the rulers in a sense?
By one of the definitions, sure, but not by the definition that anarchists use to describe themselves. At least not the majority. There's a small subset of anarchists who believe that property is theft entirely, and they wouldn't want even, your own rules on your own property. But like, the majority of anarchists believe in some form of property, usually extending from principles of self-ownership and usually extending from what's called the non-aggression principle. And those anarchists are referring to the definition of ruler that means one that does not actually own all of the property, or one that claims an undue ownership over all property in a given region. That being a king who says, I own this whole kingdom and therefore I can decide to do with it what I please, or whether it be a democratically elected leader who says that because a certain amount of people ticked a box, I can now do with your property what I want. We believe that that's fundamentally flawed in both ethics and logic, and we want to abolish such structures. But we don't think that everybody's a ruler who makes rules. We think that that's pretty absurd.
Well, no, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to clarify it, because I know there was somebody that would be listening that would have that question. But the reason I asked it the way I asked it is because you actually did manage to clear it up. Your definition of a ruler in this instance isn't because you are one of the anarchists that thinks that property is okay. You're not specifically referring to a property owner making rules within their own property. You're talking about someone outside of that property, either through force or by election, that basically forces their will onto that person, even though they are technically the owner of the property. So that's why I wanted to clarify what the difference was between how I knew some people were going to take it, because the first time you said it, that was exactly how I took it, and what you meant, and you actually did a really good job of clarifying that. And I think that's a point that a lot of people miss, is you guys aren't saying there can't be rules and that people can't make their own rules for their own property. You just don't want the government or a ruler to have authority and dominion over people that already have their own property rights and their own ability to make their own rules, so to speak. At least if I'm understanding what you're saying right now.
Yes, yeah. Basically, like, I'm going to speak like this sentence from my particular school of anarchy, which like is, like I like to say, a coalitionist, anarchist, capitalist. I believe in the principles of self-ownership, and I believe that self-ownership extends to your property and your labor and how you disperse that labor. And I think that for a ruler to come along and say that you have to follow these rules with your property that you rightly earned, regardless of whether you want to or not, I think that that's tantamount to modern day slavery, and I also think that it attempts to rob somebody of their self-ownership by saying that because you live in this society, or any society for that matter, being, a part of a global community of governed nations, that we are going to take your liberties to do with your property what you will away from you.
All right, well, believe it or not, we've actually come up to the next break. We're going to have to take a really quick break. When we come back, we'll be continuing this conversation with Jeremiah, because we're just getting started. So this is America Off the Rails. I'm your host, Rick Robinson. We'll be back in just a little over 3 minutes. Stay tuned. All right, folks, welcome back. We are still live, and we still have our guest, Jeremiah, who actually, again, has been discussing with us anarchy and some common misconceptions, apparently, about anarchy. So why don't you go ahead and continue? I just, in the interest of full disclosure, we have about 5 minutes till the next break. I did warn you there were lots of commercials.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I can understand the distrust in anarchists, because much of the public image of anarchists is people who don the circle A and then go out and fuck up public spaces. And I can see where they're coming from, but I don't agree with them in the slightest. And the fact is that there are many anarchists who think that that's not with message, or it's not good for the message at the very least. And there are many more anarchists who agree with those anarchists' fundamental premise. So anarchy is, it's anarchy. You're not going to get any one centralized viewpoint on it. And there are many people who might use the label of anarchy to describe things that I would find very tasteless. But personally, I believe in pluralism. I believe in multiple ideas. I believe in multiple ways to skin a proverbial cat, as long as it's logical. And my particular approach to anarchy has always been to promote self-ownership and the advancement of the non-aggression principle, which is essentially don't initiate force ever. If force is initiated upon you, well, the other person has deposited that into their bank. But if they don't initiate force upon you, then you have no right to initiate to be the first one to initiate that force, unless you're being threatened, which to me is an initiation of force, because it's saying essentially come at me. But that's all mostly just semantics. The idea behind anarchy is to oppose rulers, and wherever you see those rulers, as an anarchist, if you are one, you oppose those rulers in whatever context you can, essentially promoting the individual's rights over whatever other individual or collective wants to stomp on them.
All right, so I do have some questions, and, well, I'll probably be able to get in at least one before the break. So with the idea of anarchy as the way you see it, because I do think it's interesting that you brought up, with anarchy, there's not really going to be one central view, because everybody kind of has a different take on what anarchy can or should be, which honestly would make sense. Because if you guys are trying to basically have no rulers, then there would be other approaches. But I guess my question is, let's say for the sake of argument that we were to try an approach like that here, because you had mentioned not instigating, no use of force unless someone threatened you first, etc. So what about things like common defense? How would those be dealt with in an anarchist society?
Well, okay, lay me out a scenario, because common defense is a really broad-based subject upon which many fields of study have been drafted, and upon which large amounts, volumes of books have been written. So lay me out a scenario, and I'll see if I can address that scenario.
Well, as kind of an example, when this country was founded, the government wasn't nearly what it is today. They had what was called a general government, and its basic rules were for basically mutual defense of the colonies that eventually became states, and also trade between the states were basically the only things the general government was really charged with. So in an anarchist situation, if you were attacked from an outside, there wouldn't be any type of centralized military, unless I'm misunderstanding something. So I'm just kind of curious as to how that would work.
Well, there may not be a quote centralized military in that, there's one military to protect from all foreign invaders, but that's sort of I don't know if you remember, but during World War II there was a slogan popularized allegedly by a Japanese general that you cannot invade America because there would be a rifle behind every blade of grass. Well, this isn't true, at least not in a modern context. You can invade America. You can hijack planes and fly it into buildings. You can bomb public marathons. You can shoot up nightclubs. You can do these sorts of things. You can shoot up a school. You can, have mass public unrest. And you can do all of these sorts of things because there is not a rifle behind every blade of grass. Americans have sacrificed their liberty and their personal defense for the sake of the commons, and that was a huge mistake, and one that would be generally corrected under an anarchist paradigm, because in an anarchist paradigm, if you don't contribute to the system, there's no mechanism of force by which the system can fund itself without the consent of the people, which means essentially, and by the people, I mean like individual people, not the people as in, 30% of the people outvoted 20% of the people while 50% of the people stayed at home. I mean the people as in individuals. And, those individuals would have to consent to whatever public defense was going to be protecting the nation, or they wouldn't get it. And a lot of those individuals may not even consent in the first place because they might have rifles that the government now bans. They might have personal defense. They might have a militia. The government isn't necessarily friendly to these ideas anymore, as if it ever were in the first place. I mean, really, the Whiskey Rebellion kind of disproves that. But the idea of America being impervious, or at least less vulnerable to an attack because of rifles behind blades of grass, could be true, but it's not, because people have outsourced their personal safety to the government of all things, which, to me is an oxymoronic thing to do in the first place. But, that's a separate subject. The idea is that people would have to start taking responsibility for what they do in order to defend themselves and their neighbors and their family. And I think that's wonderful.
Well, folks, we will continue this conversation on the other side of the break. This is America Off the Rails. I'm your host, Rick Robinson. We have my guest, Jeremiah Harding, who's been discussing anarchism with us this evening. We'll be right back here in just about 4 minutes. Stay tuned. Back, and again, this is America Off the Rails. I'm your host, Rick Robinson. We have my guest, Jeremiah Harding, who's been discussing with us anarchy. So I want to bring something up, because this was actually pointed out to me, because one of the things that we had talked about on Twitter was my sticking point with the word anarchy. And you had mentioned that a lot of folks have a bad taste with the word anarchy in their mouths. You didn't mention something that I keep thinking back to. I think, honestly, anarchy was damaged thanks to Hollywood. If you're looking at what the actual intent of it is versus what Hollywood's portrayed it as. Because when everybody thinks of things like anarchy, they think of, post-World War III apocalyptic Earth or zombie apocalypse and all of these little fiefdoms rising up. And it doesn't sound like those are the type of things that you are actually talking about. Now, I'm not going to go too much into that, because I just want people to understand that there are other viewpoints out there, and if this is something that interests them, then at the end of the show, we'll make sure that they have ways to contact you, or anything that you want to give out as far as, ways that they could find more out about anarchy. But one of the points that had been brought to me was somebody had pointed out, well, would you be less off-put, so to speak, if we called it more voluntarism as opposed to anarchy? And honestly, I think that might help some folks, because it might help get rid of some of the negative connotations from Hollywood. And I mean, whether those negative connotations are something that would happen, I honestly don't know, because you seem to have a more positive outlook on human nature than I personally do. And again, that may have a lot to do with my background. I'm actually former law enforcement. I then spent several years doing private security, private investigations work, and unfortunately, that means I spent most of my formative years as an adult spending time seeing the negatives of society. So that may or may not have negatively impacted the way I think things should run. It also doesn't help that for nearly 20 years, I spent the majority of my life and getting a paycheck from what some would consider an authoritarian group, which may have also inadvertently colored some of my aspects, which is one reason why I wanted to have this conversation tonight. So I guess for those that may want to know the differences, because there are some people that are going to get hung up on the word anarchy. So is there actually a difference between anarchy, so to speak, or voluntarism? Is it basically the same thing? Is it just one word is more palatable than the other, or...
Well, okay, so voluntarism, in terms of the word itself, there are multiple words involved possibly. So voluntarism in specific is specifically non-coercive action, and that's not all anarchy is. That's, I guess, anarcho-pacifism would be a way to phrase voluntarism specifically. But voluntarism, if you look at the roots of the word historically, it's all to do with like basically a separation of church and state, where the church can't enforce its rules through the state. Now, there's another term called voluntarism that refers to a more like right libertarian kind of anarchy where, you know, it's all non-aggression principle and self-ownership and yada. But like, if you want to catch everybody, including people on the left, people in the center, etc., you have to use umbrella terms. And so what I use anarchy for is to describe a rulerless society. And I'm not, like, personally, in terms of messaging, I'm not going to exclude people that I disagree with on philosophical bases such as property. Just if they try to violate mine, they're going to find out what aggression gets you in an anarchist world. The idea isn't, and that's something else. The idea, my ideas anyway, aren't based in a good view of humanity. I'm a pessimist and a cynic, and I don't believe that humans are fundamentally good, which is why I don't want a centralized organization of power there that they can just sign up to be a part of in whatever small or great way, because the people who rise out of a situation like that aren't good people. The people who become at the top of these bureaucratic political chains are generally very nasty people, and they don't represent charity or voluntary contracts. They don't represent peace. They represent whatever. I'm trying to find a really civil way to say this. They represent whoever was willing to pay them the most or give them the most of what they want in order to get in that seat. And they represent the palms they greased. They don't represent the average folk in the way that the average folk could much better represent themselves. So I don't want a centralized organization of people, not because I think people are good, but because I don't believe that the answer to people are bad is we should elect a group of people to govern people because of it.
Well, I guess I could see that, and again, I just kind of wanted to get to the different distinctions, because I knew there was something I was missing, because I didn't really think about the difference between voluntarism, so to speak, and then voluntarism. Now, as of right now, we need to take one other break and get it out of the way. This one will run for about 2 minutes, and that will give me time to fix an issue that has just cropped up. So we will be right back, but bear with us for just a moment, because right now I'm kind of locked out of the system, so I'm having to play the commercials manually. We'll be back here in just about 2 minutes. Stay tuned. Alright, folks, we are back, and for those of you listening on the website, if anybody can hear me right now, you may want to put in there to tell people to hit F5 on the screen and let it refresh, because unfortunately the speaker glitch has struck again, so the player had to be reset while we were on that commercial, which was why you guys got about 20 seconds of silence while I was rebooting everything. Alright, so we are back, we are live, and we are down to the last bit of the show. We've got about roughly 10... what, no? About 14 minutes left total. So we've got one last break here in just about 8 minutes or so. But since we are coming towards the end of the show, is there any type of information you want to give out for folks that may be interested in finding out more about what it is that you guys kind of espouse as far as this whole self-governance, rules but no rulers? Are there sites anybody can go to, or is there contact information, that kind of stuff?
Well, if you want to get into contact with me specifically, just try and find me on Twitter at InsanityIsFree. And you can also basically find me everywhere else by that. What else? If you want to get in contact with anyone else, I would suggest looking at hashtags, because that's where I learned a lot. but also for specific information, it depends on which school you're more likely to go to. There are good sites that are related to all schools of anarchy, and so I'll just break it down into, I guess, left and right, even though that paradigm sucks and it's not really good at describing things. For the right kinds of sides of libertarianism, you would want to go to some place like LouRockwell.com, Mises.org. Where else is good? The Free Thought Project for news, that sort of thing. There are many independent broadcasters that discuss like anarchy from this sort of perspective. Adam Kokesh, Stefan Molyneux occasionally discusses it. Josie Wales, plenty of good people like that. There are, like, I have a show, Moment of Rage, and a podcast, Chain Reaction Podcast, which is available on YouTube, where we basically shoot the shit every Sunday about it. Not this Sunday, but the next Sunday, because this Sunday co-host is on hiatus. But like, if you're a left-leaning person, then I would suggest the Center for a Stateless Society. I would suggest Foundation for Economic Education. I would suggest anarchistlibrary.org. Places like that are great for a more consistent and thorough message, especially Anarchist Library, which is in reading. Same with Mises for the right kind of ideas, because on Mises they have this entire library provided by the publishers of readings from anyone from Ron Paul to Murray Rothbard, both of which have either anarchist leanings or are outright anarchist. So there are sites like that. There are good databasing information, but basically it's sort of like that Bible verse, by your fruits you shall be known. If you find somebody espousing an idea that would go directly contrary to rulers, then they're probably at least somewhat close to anarchists, which is one of the things you wanted to show, is that we aren't really that much different, even though, like, basically the elites want to polarize us, make us fight each other. But the ideas that you can find are typically going to come in very small doses from people who are just sort of feeling the waters. And so just the main thing I could suggest to anyone, no matter your personality, your politics, whatever, is just talk, and don't reserve yourself from talking to people who call themselves anarchists, because that's going to be where you're going to get the most of your information from, is just learning from other perspectives, trying to understand, discussing with them, because, hey, this whole thing, anarchy, all of it could be wrong. There could be some inherent benefit to statism that I'm just not seeing. But we won't know, both parties won't know what's best until they compete in the marketplace of ideas. And I think that marketplace of ideas is where you're going to find the most information, the most beneficial information about anarchy that you can.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting that you bring up the fact that those in power seem to want us fighting with each other, because I've actually been coming to the same conclusion myself now for quite some time. One of the reasons that I started doing all of this was I actually came to a realization nearly a decade ago at this point that politics had basically become nothing but a brand war, because when you really stop and think about it, I mean, look at everything that's going on in Congress today. We had so many people that for the last 8 years have told us, you know, give us everything back and we'll fix it. Now they have everything back. They're still not fixing it. In some ways, they're actually perpetuating the same things that they ran as to being opposed to. And then the parties will, the powers will flip. The only thing that will ever actually change are the groups that are getting the money. That's the only thing that really changes when the parties change power, is the direction of the spigots and which special interest groups are getting the money. And that's one of the reasons why this has become more and more difficult for me to do on a daily basis, without coming to the realization that, you know, at the end of the day, whether you're buying a Coca-Cola or you're buying a Pepsi, Yes, one's in a nice, pretty red can. The other's in a nice, pretty blue can. But at the end of the day, there are slight differences, but you're still purchasing a soda. When you pull the lever right now, with the way the system's set up, you're basically getting the same thing in a slightly different wrapper. And that has been really hard for me
which
to come
is why they want us fighting over Russia.
Exactly. Because if we're arguing about what may or may not have happened with Russia, we're not noticing everything else that's going on. Here's the really scary thing for me with this. Every time anything like this has ever happened, where they've managed to basically make sure that the right hand has no idea what the left hand is doing, or vice versa, however you want to look at it, there's always a huge story that drops shortly thereafter. One of the things that I'm reminded of, and this was something that drove me crazy when I was younger, because it was when I was really starting to get interested in politics, was during the end of the Clinton campaign, because by our Clinton era, because at that point I had, I was an adult, I was starting to have to pay taxes and pay bills and all those things that I'd never really had to do before consistently. And one of the things that drove me crazy for months why would somebody, even if they were a disbarred attorney, not be smart enough to stand up in front of the Senate and say, look, guys, this is a private matter between myself and my wife, so therefore I plead the fifth. I'm not gonna bring my bedroom life into the public life because I don't have to. This is a private matter between myself and my wife, and I don't have to talk to you about that. So I plead the fifth for everything that you're asking me. But there's something that nobody noticed. Yeah. Hang on, I'll give you a second, I promise. But there's something nobody noticed, because all this time that he's standing up there and he's lobbing cruise missiles at aspirin factories and everything else, the news story broke about what was happening at the end of the Reagan era and the fact that the CIA was actively involved with the drug cartels. But nobody was paying any attention to that because we were too busy talking about Bill Clinton getting his cigar puffed on in the Oval Office.
Yeah, well, and that's the funny part about the whole deal here, is that when you have the idea of somebody like Clinton possibly being adulterous in the White House, that's national outrage. But when you have like the same sort of politicians, specifically Clinton, bombing Sudanese pharmaceutical factories, and you have the Afghan Soviet War, where in a similar time frame, where they pointed the Afghans, radical mujahideen, at the Russian government essentially, and said, hey, you know what? You're right. Allah will definitely smile on you, and here's how to make IEDs. And now we have suicide bombings to worry about. So every time government does something that seems outrageous, every time there's a kofefe, or, Obama joking about predator drones, which he just used to assassinate an American citizen and his brother, whether or not you have Bush saying mission accomplished, or literally anything, you have the political elites in the background moving shit around so that they get to profit off of everything while we're distracted and arguing about the daily news safe headlines, not U.S. is still bombing people and killing large amounts of the world, and, using the green agenda to force people overseas to work instead of having jobs that are actually rationally created here, and pushing a minimum wage to make sure that stays happening. They're not talking about the global empire that's continuing to spread, or the fact that their freedom and privacy are dwindling by the moment. I mean, did you know that there was a smart device that sensed a domestic disturbance somehow and called the cops, and the cops actually showed up and dealt with it? That's scary because of what it means. It means that they're listening to us at all times, whether it be the CIA or the NSA or whatever agency doesn't exist that we'll soon be finding out about when they have more government documents uncovered. They are fucking us over in a very serious way, pardon the language. And they are distracting us while they do it. They want us fighting each other instead of them.
Well, honestly, we kind of ended in something that we can both agree with to a point. But at this point, we are officially out of time. Why don't you remind folks where it is that they can find you on Twitter, should they be interested in getting more information about anarchy or pretty much anything else that you deal with, for that matter, including your own show?
That would be Moment of Rage. You can just find that by Googling Moment of Rage. And additionally, you can find me on Twitter and pretty much everywhere else by Insanity is Free.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this particular episode of America Off the Rails, folks. Unfortunately, the Spreaker gremlin has now hit us twice, so I'm just going to have to close things up and fix it on for everybody else. So we are officially done for the night, folks. Again, I want to thank my guest Jeremiah for hanging out for the entire show and talking about anarchy, volunteerism, all of that crazy, wacky stuff, as you know, my co-host on Friday nights would say. But anyway, we are officially out of here for the night. I want to thank everybody for taking the time to tune in. I will be back with you live tomorrow night for a double shot. We have Jen and Rick first at 10 p.m. Eastern, and then, of course, I'll be finishing off the night with America Off the Rails at 11 p.m. Eastern. And then I'll be back Friday night for Robinson and Wright. Again, thank you all for tuning in. I hope everybody enjoys the rest of your evening.
Hey, this is Jeremiah Harding, and you just watched one of my videos or something, probably. I hope you liked it enough to leave a like, and if you really liked it, you can also subscribe to my channel and join the growing army of people who are also angry about something or other. And if you appreciate what I do here on my YouTube channel or on Chain Reaction Podcast or Moment of Rage, consider supporting me by buying a shirt or donating something or joining my Patreon. Thanks.